James Mitchell had survived 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 Purple Hearts, and 40 years of survivor's guilt. But now, lying in a hospital bed with stage 4 cancer eating away at his lungs, he faced his hardest mission yet, finding the child he saved in 1975. The boy's name was David. He would be about 45 now, if he had survived. James had kept one promise to himself, that he would find David before he died, and make sure the rescue hadn't been in vain. What James didn't know was that David was closer than he ever imagined, and the reunion would happen in a way that would leave everyone in that hospital in tears. Before we dive deep into this incredible story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because this story will remind you that some connections transcend time, distance, and even death itself. The oncologist's office smelled of antiseptic and false hope. Dr. Patricia Chen sat across from James Mitchell, her fingers steepled together in that way doctors do when they're about to deliver news that will shatter someone's world. James had seen that posture before, in field hospitals in Vietnam, when medics knew a wounded soldier wouldn't make it through the night. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Chen began, her voice professionally gentle, "the scans show that the cancer has metastasized to your lymph nodes, liver and bones. At this stage, we're looking at palliative care rather than curative treatment." James nodded slowly. He was 68 years old, and he had known this day would come. Years of exposure to Agent Orange during the war had left many veterans with similar fates. He had watched too many of his brothers in arms die from cancers that ate them from the inside out. "How long?" James asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Dr. Chen looked down at her notes, as if the paper could provide easier words than the ones she had to say. 3 to 6 months, maybe longer with aggressive palliative treatment, but the quality of life would be significantly compromised. 3 to 6 months. James processed this information with the same calm he had maintained under enemy fire. In the military, they taught you to assess threats, calculate odds, and execute missions under impossible conditions. This was just another mission, except this time there would be no medals, no victory, and no coming home. "I want to ask you something, Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Chen continued. "Do you have family, someone who can help you through this?" James thought about the question. He had been married once, decades ago, but Sarah had left him after 10 years of watching him wake up screaming from nightmares, of dealing with his drinking, of living with a man whose body had come home, but whose mind was still in the jungles of Southeast Asia. They had no children. She had wanted them, but James had been too afraid of bringing a child into a world he no longer understood. His parents were long dead. His brother lived in Oregon, and they hadn't spoken in 15 years, not since a drunken argument at Thanksgiving where things were said that couldn't be unsaid. The men he served with, his real brothers, were scattered across the country or buried in it. "No," James said finally. "No family." Dr. Chen's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything you need? Anyone you want to contact?" Sometimes people in your situation want to make arrangements, tie up loose ends, reconnect with people from their past. That word, past. James felt it like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. His past was a minefield of memories he had spent 4 decades trying to navigate without detonating. But there was one memory, one face, that had haunted him more than all the others combined. "There is someone," James heard himself saying, "a boy I knew in Vietnam. I need to find him." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "A friend from your unit?" "No," James said quietly. "A child. I pulled him out of a burning village during an evacuation. I've thought about him every day since. I need to know if he survived, if he's okay, if saving him meant something." The doctor was quiet for a moment, and James could see her calculating whether this was the rational wish of a dying man, or the delusion of someone whose mind was already slipping. "Mr. Mitchell, that was over 40 years ago. Finding someone from that time, especially a Vietnamese child, would be incredibly difficult. Most records were destroyed, and many refugees never made it to the United States." "I know," James said, "but I have to try. It's the only thing I have left to do." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "There are organizations that help veterans find people from the war. I can give you some resources. But Mr. Mitchell, I want you to be realistic about your timeline. You may not have enough time to complete this search." James looked her directly in the eyes. Then I'd better get started right now. He left the oncologist's office with a folder full of pamphlets about hospice care, pain management, and support groups for terminal patients. James threw them all in the trash can outside the building, except for one, a single sheet of paper with contact information for the Vietnam War Legacy Foundation, an organization that helped reconnect veterans with the people they had known during the war. That night, in his small apartment in Arlington, Virginia, James sat at his kitchen table with a pen and paper. The apartment was sparse, decorated with the minimalism of someone who had learned to travel light and never really stopped. A few books on military history, a television he rarely watched, photographs on the mantle of men in uniform, most of them dead now, and one photograph he kept in his wallet, protected in a plastic sleeve, yellowed with age and creased from decades of being carried everywhere he went. James pulled out his wallet and carefully removed the photograph. The image was faded but still clear enough. It showed a younger version of himself, maybe 25 years old, dressed in jungle fatigues, his face streaked with soot and blood. In his arms he held a small Vietnamese boy, no more than 5 years old, with frightened eyes and burns on his arms and legs. The boy was clutching James's uniform with tiny fists, holding on as if James was the only solid thing in a world that had just exploded into chaos. And James remembered taking this photograph. It had been April 29, 1975, during the Fall of Saigon. His unit had been part of the desperate evacuation effort, trying to get American personnel and Vietnamese allies out of the country, before the North Vietnamese army completed its takeover. The city had been in absolute chaos. Helicopters flying in and out, crowds of people fighting to get aboard, buildings burning, gunfire echoing through the streets. James's unit had been ordered to secure a landing zone in a village outside the city. When they arrived, they found the village under attack, buildings on fire, civilians running in every direction. That's when James heard the crying. It was a sound that cut through the explosions and screaming. A child's voice calling for help in Vietnamese. James had run toward the sound without thinking, without orders, acting on pure instinct. He found the boy trapped in a burning building. The roof partially collapsed, flames licking at the wooden structure. The boy's parents were already dead, killed in the attack. Their bodies lay in the doorway where they had tried to shield their son. James had kicked through the debris, grabbed the boy, and carried him out just as the building collapsed behind them. The boy had clung to him, repeating the same words over and over in Vietnamese. James didn't speak the language well, but he understood enough. The boy was saying, "Save me. Please save me." James had carried the boy back to the landing zone and put him on one of the last helicopters out of the village. In the chaos of the evacuation, he had asked one of the interpreters to write down the boy's name and any information he had. The interpreter had scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to James just as the helicopter lifted off. The boy's name was David Nguyen. He was 5 years old. His parents had been teachers in Saigon, who had fled to the village when the city became too dangerous. The boy had an aunt who lived somewhere in the United States, but the interpreter didn't know where. That was all the information James had. He had tried to follow up after the war, but everything had been chaos. Records were lost or destroyed. Refugee camps were overwhelmed. The American government was trying to forget about Vietnam as quickly as possible, and the fate of one small boy wasn't a priority for anyone except the soldier who had carried him out of the fire. Over the years, James had made half-hearted attempts to find David. He had contacted refugee resettlement organizations, veteran groups, anyone who might have records, but the trail had always gone cold. Eventually, James had convinced himself that it was better not to know. Maybe David hadn't survived. Maybe he had died in a refugee camp or during the boat journey that so many Vietnamese had attempted after the war. Maybe it was better to remember him as a frightened 5-year-old clinging to a soldier's uniform, frozen in time, rather than face the possibility that saving him hadn't mattered in the end. But now, with 3 to 6 months left to live, James realized he couldn't die without knowing. He needed to know if his one good act in that terrible war had meant something. He needed to know if David Nguyen had survived, had thrived, had built a life in the country James had helped him reach. James wrote his letter to the Vietnam War Legacy Foundation carefully, explaining his story, providing every detail he could remember. He included a copy of the photograph, the one he had carried for 40 years. He mailed it the next morning, then came home and waited. Days turned into weeks. James went to his follow-up appointments, started his palliative treatment, and felt his body slowly betraying him. The cancer was aggressive, just as Dr. Chen had warned. Some days he couldn't get out of bed, other days he felt almost normal, as if his body was trying to pretend nothing was wrong. He didn't tell anyone about his condition. There was no one to tell. The other residents in his apartment building barely knew him. He had worked as a security guard at a shopping mall for the past 20 years, but he had already quit, telling his supervisor he was retiring. No explanations, no farewell party, just a quiet exit from a job that had helped him pay bills but never gave him purpose. 6 weeks after sending his letter, James received a phone call from a woman named Sarah Thompson, who worked for the Vietnam War Legacy Foundation. Her voice was kind but professional. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm calling about your inquiry regarding David Nguyen. I want you to know that we've made some progress, but I need to manage your expectations. Finding specific individuals from that period is extremely challenging." James gripped the phone tighter, his heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with his illness. "Did you find him? Is he alive?" "We found several David Nguyen's who came to the United States as refugees in 1975, Sarah said carefully, "but narrowing it down to your specific David has proven difficult. Many refugees changed their names, and records from the evacuation are incomplete. However, there's one possibility that seems promising." "Tell me," James said urgently. Sarah hesitated. "There's a doctor, David Nguyen, who works as a cardiothoracic surgeon at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. He would be the right age, and according to his biography on the hospital website, he came to the United States from Vietnam in 1975 as a young child. He was raised by an aunt in California, and eventually went to medical school." James felt something break open in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in so long he almost didn't recognize it. "Hope, that's less than an hour from here," he whispered. "Yes," Sarah said. "But Mr. Mitchell, I need to caution you. We haven't confirmed this is your David Nguyen. There were many children evacuated in 1975, and many of them had similar circumstances. We've reached out to Dr. Nguyen's office, but we haven't heard back yet. These things take time, and I don't have time." James interrupted, his voice rough. "I'm dying. Cancer. 3 to 6 months, probably less now. I need to know if it's him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sarah spoke again, her professional tone had softened into something more human. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Mitchell. Let me see what I can do to expedite this. In the meantime, I'm going to email you Dr. Nguyen's publicly available information. But please, don't contact him directly yet. Let us handle this through proper channels. This is a delicate situation, and we want to approach it carefully." James agreed, though he had no intention of waiting. After hanging up, he sat at his computer and searched for Dr. David Nguyen at Walter Reed. The hospital's website showed a professional photograph of a man in his mid-40s, wearing surgical scrubs and a white coat. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile. James stared at the photograph for a long time, trying to see the 5-year-old boy in this accomplished surgeon's face. Was it him? Could it be? The photograph from 1975 showed a terrified child, and this was a confident professional. 40 years could change a person beyond recognition. But something in the eyes felt familiar. James spent the rest of the day researching Dr. David Nguyen. The man's credentials were impressive. He had graduated from Stanford Medical School, completed his residency at Johns Hopkins, and had been working at Walter Reed for the past 15 years. He specialized in cardiac surgery, particularly congenital heart defects in children. He had published numerous papers and received several awards for his work. There was an interview in a medical journal where Dr. Nguyen talked about his motivation for becoming a doctor. "I came to this country with nothing," he had said in the interview. "I was given a second chance at life, and I've spent my career trying to give that same chance to others. Every child I operate on is a reminder of how fragile life is, and how important it is to fight for it." Reading those words, James felt tears streaming down his face. This had to be him. This had to be David. But he needed to be sure. The next morning, James took the metro to Bethesda, Maryland. The journey exhausted him more than it should have. His body was failing faster now, the cancer spreading like an invading army that couldn't be stopped. By the time he reached Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, he was sweating and short of breath. The hospital was massive, a sprawling complex that served active-duty military personnel, veterans, and their families. James stood outside the main entrance, looking up at the building, suddenly uncertain about what he was doing. What if this wasn't his David? What if it was, but David didn't remember him? What if David didn't want to be reminded of that terrible day in 1975? James could turn around right now, go home, and die without ever knowing the truth. It would be easier that way, less complicated. But he had never been someone who chose the easy path. He walked into the hospital and approached the information desk. A young woman in scrubs looked up with a professional smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Dr. David Nguyen," James said. "I need to speak with him." The woman checked her computer. "Dr. Nguyen is in surgery this morning, but he should be available this afternoon. Do you have an appointment?" "No," James admitted. "This is personal." The woman's expression became more guarded. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out information about staff members' personal schedules. If you need to see a doctor, I can help you make an appointment." "But please," James interrupted. And something in his voice made the woman pause. "I knew Dr. Nguyen a long time ago, in Vietnam. I'm dying, and I need to see him before it's too late." The woman looked at him for a long moment, and James could see her internal debate. Finally, she said quietly, "Wait here. Let me see what I can do." She picked up the phone and had a hushed conversation with someone. James couldn't hear what was being said, but he saw her glance at him several times. After a few minutes, she hung up and said, "Dr. Nguyen's surgical schedule is full today, but I've left a message with his assistant. Someone will call you if he's available to speak with you. Can I have your contact information?" James provided his phone number, thanked the woman, and found a seat in the waiting area. He sat there for 3 hours, watching people come and go. Wounded soldiers in wheelchairs, families holding hands in waiting rooms, doctors and nurses moving with purposeful urgency. This was a place where people fought for life, where miracles and tragedies happened every day. James wondered how many lives Dr. David Nguyen had saved in his career. Hundreds, probably, maybe thousands. If this was his David, then the boy James had pulled from that fire had grown up to become a man who pulled others from the edge of death. The circle felt complete in a way that made James's chest tight with emotion. His phone rang, startling him out of his thoughts. An unknown number. "Hello, is this James Mitchell?" a male voice asked. The voice was professional but warm, with just a trace of an accent that suggested English might not have been his first language. "Yes," James said, his heart pounding. "This is Dr. David Nguyen. I received a message that you're trying to reach me." The message said something about Vietnam. James stood up, suddenly needing to be on his feet for this conversation. "Dr. Nguyen, I'm sorry to bother you at work. I know you must be incredibly busy, but I need to ask you something. Were you evacuated from Vietnam in April 1975? From a village outside Saigon?" There was a long pause. "Yes," Dr. Nguyen said slowly. "I was 5 years old. I don't remember much from that time. But yes, I was brought to the United States during the evacuation." "Why are you asking?" James closed his eyes, feeling 40 years of weight lifting from his shoulders. "Because I'm the soldier who carried you out of that burning building. I'm the one who put you on the helicopter. I've been looking for you for 40 years. The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. James could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the eyes of other people in the waiting room glancing at him curiously. "Dr. Nguyen," James said after the silence had stretched too long. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," Dr. Nguyen said, and his voice was shaking now. "I'm here. I don't know what to say. My aunt told me stories about the soldier who saved me, but I never knew his name. She said he disappeared in the chaos, and we never had a way to find him. I tried to find you," James said urgently. "For years I tried, but all I had was your name and the memory of your face. I didn't know if you had survived, if you had made it to America, if you had a good life. I just knew I needed to find you before I died." "Before you died," Dr. Nguyen's voice sharpened with professional concern. Are you sick? Cancer, James said simply. Stage 4, 3 to 6 months. Probably less now. I don't have much time, but I needed to know. I needed to know if saving you mattered. Mr. Mitchell, Dr. Nguyen said. And there were tears in his voice now. James, I'm a surgeon. I save lives for a living. I've operated on over 1,000 patients in my career. I've given people their lives back, given children a chance to grow up, given families more time together. And I only got to do any of that because you pulled me out of that fire 40 years ago. Of course it mattered. You didn't just save one life that day. You saved all the lives I've been able to save since then. James sat back down heavily, his legs suddenly unable to support him. Tears were streaming down his face, and he didn't care who saw. I've carried your photograph in my wallet for 40 years, James said. Every day I've looked at it and wondered if you were okay. Now I know. Where are you right now? Dr. Nguyen asked urgently. I'm at Walter Reed, in the main lobby. I came here hoping to see you, but I understand if you're too busy. I just needed to hear your voice, to know you were real. Don't move, Dr. Nguyen said firmly. I'm finishing up in surgery in about 30 minutes. Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming to find you. James waited. The 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. He watched the clock on the wall counting down the seconds, terrified that something would happen, that Dr. Nguyen would get pulled into an emergency surgery, or change his mind about meeting a dying man who had disrupted his workday with a story from 40 years ago. But exactly 32 minutes later, a man in surgical scrubs came through the double doors leading to the surgical wing. He was tall, with graying hair at his temples, and those same kind eyes James had seen in the photograph online. The man stopped just inside the lobby, and looked around, his gaze moving across faces until it landed on James. Their eyes met across the lobby, and James saw recognition flash across the surgeon's face. Not recognition of James himself, who had aged 40 years since that day in Vietnam, but recognition of something deeper. A connection that transcended time and memory. Dr. David Nguyen walked across the lobby. As he got closer, James could see the emotions playing across his face: wonder, disbelief, gratitude, and something that looked like coming home. James stood up on shaky legs, and the two men stood facing each other, separated by 4 decades and everything those years had contained. James Mitchell, Dr. Nguyen said softly. Yes, James replied. David Nguyen. And then Dr. Nguyen did something James hadn't expected. He reached out and pulled James into a tight embrace, the kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. James felt himself breaking down, 40 years of survivor's guilt, and wondering and hoping finally released in this moment. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen whispered against his shoulder. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for giving me the chance to become who I am. Thank you for carrying me to safety when I had no one else. They stood there in the hospital lobby, 2 men bound together by fire and war, and a 5-year-old boy's desperate need to survive. People walked around them, giving them curious glances, but neither man noticed or cared. When they finally pulled apart, both men were crying freely. Dr. Nguyen put his hands on James's shoulders and looked at him intently. You said you have cancer. Stage 4. James nodded. Lung cancer. Spread to other organs. There's nothing they can do except manage the pain. Dr. Nguyen's professional mask slipped into place, the surgeon assessing a patient. Who's your oncologist? What treatment plan are you on? Are you getting adequate pain management? Dr. Patricia Chen at Arlington Medical Center. I'm on palliative care. The pain is manageable for now. Arlington Medical Center is a good hospital, but I want you to transfer your care here to Walter Reed. I can't operate on lung cancer. That's not my specialty, but I have colleagues who are the best in the country. Let me make some calls, get you seen by our oncology team. Maybe there are options your current doctors haven't considered. James shook his head gently. David, I appreciate it, but I've made peace with this. The cancer is too advanced. I didn't come here looking for a miracle cure. I came looking for closure. Closure, Dr. Nguyen repeated. And James could see him struggling with the concept. Here was a man who spent his life fighting death, who refused to accept that some battles couldn't be won. Yes, James said. I needed to know that saving you was worth it. Now I know. Now I can let go. Doctor. Nguyen was quiet for a long moment, and James could see him processing this, trying to reconcile his instinct to heal with the reality of James's condition. How much time do you have? He finally asked. Weeks probably. Maybe a month or two if I'm lucky. Then we don't have much time to catch up on 40 years, do we? Dr. Nguyen said with a sad smile. No, James agreed. We don't. Are you free right now? I don't have any more surgeries scheduled today. Let me buy you coffee, or lunch, or whatever you can manage. I want to hear everything. I want to know about your life. What happened after you put me on that helicopter? How you ended up here? James felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with his illness. I'd like that very much. They went to the hospital cafeteria, found a quiet corner and talked for hours. Dr. Nguyen asked questions about that day in 1975, and James told him everything he remembered. The chaos of the evacuation, the burning village, the sound of David's crying cutting through the explosions, the feeling of carrying a small child through fire and debris, the moment of putting him on the helicopter and hoping it was enough. I don't remember much from that day, Dr. Nguyen admitted. I have fragments, images, mostly, fire, smoke, my mother's face before she died, and a soldier with kind eyes who told me I would be okay. I didn't speak English then, but I understood the tone of his voice. He made me feel safe in the middle of chaos. That was the hardest day of my life, James said quietly. The whole war was hell, but that day was something different. We lost so many people. We couldn't save everyone. I carried you out of that village, but there were dozens of other children we left behind. For years I've wondered why did I hear your voice and not theirs? Why did you survive when so many others didn't? Survivor's guilt, Dr. Nguyen said with understanding. I've treated many veterans over the years. It's a common burden. Did you experience it? Growing up knowing you survived when your parents didn't? Dr. Nguyen was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee without drinking it. Every day, he finally said, my aunt, the woman who raised me, told me that my parents died saving me. They could have run when the attack started, but they went back to our house to get me. They died protecting me. For years I felt like I needed to justify their sacrifice, to become someone worthy of what they gave up. Is that why you became a doctor? Partly. I wanted to save lives because someone saved mine. I wanted to give other families the chance to stay together when mine was torn apart. Every child I operate on, every heart I repair, feels like I'm honoring my parents' sacrifice and your courage. James felt his throat tighten with emotion. You've done so much more than I ever imagined. When I pulled you out of that fire, I just wanted you to live. I never thought about what kind of man you would become. I've been blessed, Dr. Nguyen said. My aunt was an amazing woman. She worked 3 jobs to put me through school. She never let me forget where I came from, or how lucky I was to have a second chance. She told me that America gave us an opportunity, and it was my responsibility to make the most of it. Is she still alive? James asked. No, Doctor, Nguyen said sadly. She passed away 5 years ago, but she got to see me become a doctor, got to meet my wife and children. She died knowing I had a good life, that her sacrifices weren't in vain. You have a family? James asked. And hearing the joy in his own voice surprised him. A wife and 2 children, Dr. Nguyen said, pulling out his phone to show pictures. My daughter just started medical school. She wants to be a pediatrician. My son is in college, studying engineering. James looked at the photographs of smiling faces. A beautiful woman with intelligent eyes. A young woman who looked like her father, wearing a white coat with a stethoscope around her neck. A young man in a college sweatshirt, holding a trophy from some academic competition. They're beautiful, James said. You've built a wonderful life. Because of you, Dr. Nguyen said firmly. None of this would exist if you hadn't run into that burning building. My children wouldn't have been born. My daughter wouldn't be becoming a doctor. The 1,000 patients I've operated on would have had different surgeons, or maybe no surgeon at all. You changed the trajectory of so many lives that day, and you didn't even know it. They talked until the cafeteria started closing for the evening. James told Dr. Nguyen about his life after Vietnam. The struggles with PTSD, the failed marriage, the years of drinking and trying to forget, the slow process of getting sober, of finding some measure of peace, of learning to live with memories that would never completely fade. I'm sorry you've carried so much pain, Dr. Nguyen said. Thank you for carrying it anyway. Thank you for not giving up, even when life was hard. Thank you for looking for me, for needing to know if I was okay. As the evening darkened outside the cafeteria windows, Dr. Nguyen asked, James, where are you staying? Do you have someone taking care of you? I have an apartment in Arlington. I'm managing okay on my own. That's not acceptable, Dr. Nguyen said firmly. And James could hear the surgeon's authority in his voice. You're dying, and you're alone. That's not how this is going to work. David, I didn't come here looking for charity or pity. I just needed closure. And now you have it, Dr. Nguyen said. But that doesn't mean we're done with each other. You saved my life 40 years ago. Now it's my turn to take care of you. James started to protest, but Dr. Nguyen held up his hand. I'm not giving you a choice in this. You're transferring your care to Walter Reed immediately. I'm going to make sure you have the best palliative care available, and you're not spending whatever time you have left alone in an apartment. My wife and I have a guest room. You're coming to stay with us. I couldn't possibly impose like that, James said. It's not an imposition. It's an honor. James, you gave me my life. The absolute least I can do is make sure your remaining days are comfortable and filled with people who care about you. James felt tears welling up again. I don't deserve this kind of kindness. Yes you do, Dr. Nguyen said gently. You deserve so much more than I can ever give you. But this is a start. That evening Dr. Nguyen drove James back to his apartment in Arlington. As they pulled up to the modest building, Dr. Nguyen looked around at the neighborhood with a physician's eye, assessing, evaluating. Have you been living here alone all this time? 20 years, James confirmed. It's enough for one person. They went upstairs to James's apartment, and Dr. Nguyen helped him pack a bag with clothes and personal items. The apartment was as sparse as James's soul had been before today. A bed, a table, a chair, a television. No decorations except for the photographs of his military unit, and the few mementos from Vietnam. These men, Dr. Nguyen said, looking at one of the photographs. Were they your friends? My brothers, James said. Most of them are gone now. War, cancer, suicide. We all carried the war home with us in different ways. Dr. Nguyen carefully packed the photograph. They'd be proud of you, I think, for finding me, for not giving up. 2 hours later they arrived at Dr. Nguyen's home in a quiet suburb of Bethesda. It was a beautiful house, not ostentatious but clearly comfortable. A well-maintained lawn, warm lights glowing in the windows, the kind of home that represented the American dream that so many Vietnamese refugees had died trying to reach. Dr. Nguyen's wife Lisa met them at the door. She was a gracious woman in her early 40s, and her eyes filled with tears when her husband explained who James was. You're the soldier, she said softly. David has told me about you. We've always hoped we would find you someday. He found me, James said, just in time. That night James slept in a comfortable bed in a warm house, surrounded by the family of the boy he had saved 40 years ago. For the first time in decades, he didn't have nightmares about Vietnam. Instead he dreamed of helicopters lifting off into the sunset, carrying children to safety. And this time, when he woke up he knew at least one of those children had made it. The next morning, James woke to the smell of coffee and breakfast. He found Dr. Nguyen in the kitchen, already dressed in casual clothes despite it being Saturday. I've taken the next 2 weeks off work, Dr. Nguyen announced. I told the hospital I had a family emergency. They understood. David, you don't have to do that, James protested. Your patients need you, and you need me, Dr. Nguyen said firmly. My patients will have other surgeons. You and I have 40 years to catch up on, and we don't have the luxury of waiting. Over breakfast, Dr. Nguyen's children came downstairs. His daughter Jennifer was in her mid-20s, with her father's intelligent eyes and gentle manner. His son Michael was 22, tall and lanky with an easy smile. Dr. Nguyen had called them the night before to explain who James was, and both young people looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. So, you're the soldier who saved Dad, Jennifer said, sitting down across from James. He's told us stories about you our whole lives. We never thought we'd actually meet you. I'm glad your father survived to have children, James said, looking at you both, knowing that you exist because of what happened that day. It makes everything worth it. What was it like? Michael asked. Vietnam, I mean. What was it like being there? James hesitated. He had spent decades avoiding talking about the war, deflecting questions, keeping his memories locked away where they couldn't hurt anyone. But looking at these young people, the grandchildren of the couple who had died saving David, he felt they deserved to know. It was beautiful and terrible, James said slowly. The country itself was stunning. Green jungles, rice paddies that looked like mirrors reflecting the sky, mountains that touched the clouds. But it was also hell. We were young men sent to fight in a war we didn't fully understand, for reasons that kept changing. Good people died on both sides. Families were destroyed, and those of us who survived carried the weight of it forever. Do you regret going? Jennifer asked. James thought about the question. I regret that the war happened at all. I regret that so many people died. But I can't regret going because if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't have found your father, and then you wouldn't be here asking me these questions. Dr. Nguyen's wife Lisa brought over a plate of eggs and toast. You need to eat, James. Dr. Nguyen told me about your condition. We need to keep your strength up. Please, call me David, Dr. Nguyen said to James. Mr. Mitchell is too formal for someone who saved my life, and you should call me James, not Mr. Mitchell. James David corrected himself with a smile. Lisa is right. You need to eat. Over the next few days, James experienced something he hadn't felt in decades. He felt like part of a family. David took him to his follow-up appointments at Walter Reed, where he was examined by the oncology team. The doctors confirmed what James already knew. The cancer was too advanced for any curative treatment, but they adjusted his pain medications and made sure he was as comfortable as possible. In the evenings, the Nguyen family would gather for dinner, and James found himself telling stories he hadn't shared in years. Stories about his childhood in rural Pennsylvania, about joining the military, about the brothers he had served with. David's children listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed they genuinely cared about his life. Why did you join the military? Michael asked one evening. My father served in World War II, James explained. He taught me that when your country calls, you answer. I believed in duty, in service, in being part of something larger than myself. The war turned out to be more complicated than I expected, but I never regretted the decision to serve. Did you ever think about what happened to the children you evacuated? Jennifer asked. Every single day, James said quietly. But especially David. There was something about that moment, carrying him out of that fire, that stayed with me. Maybe it was because I could actually save someone in the middle of all that chaos. Most of the time in war you can't save anyone. You just try to survive. But that day I saved one life, and it mattered. David reached across the table and squeezed James's hand. It mattered more than you'll ever know. As the days passed, James felt his strength fading. The cancer was progressing rapidly, and there were times when he couldn't get out of bed, when the pain broke through even the strongest medications. But David was always there, using his medical knowledge to keep James comfortable, adjusting dosages, arranging for home care nurses, doing everything possible to ease his suffering. You should be with your patients, James said during one particularly difficult afternoon, when David had spent hours at his bedside. You are my patient, David replied. The most important one I've ever had. One evening, about 10 days after James had moved in, David sat beside his bed and said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Of course, James said. Are you afraid of dying, I mean? James thought about the question carefully. A month ago he would have said no. Death had felt like a relief, an end to decades of survivors' guilt and loneliness. But now, surrounded by this family, knowing that his one good act had created such beauty in the world, he found himself hesitant to let go. I'm not afraid of death itself, James said finally. I've faced death many times, but I am afraid of leaving this. Leaving you and your family. This warmth I've found in my final days. For so long, I thought I didn't deserve happiness or connection. Now that I have it, I'm afraid to lose it. You're not losing it, David said gently. What we have, this connection between us, it doesn't end when you die. You'll always be part of our family. My children will tell their children about you. Your story will live on. I hope they remember it correctly, James said with a slight smile. That I wasn't a hero, Just a soldier who did one good thing in the middle of a terrible war. That one good thing changed everything, David said. Don't diminish it. The next morning, James woke to find David sitting beside his bed again. But this time he wasn't alone. The entire Nguyen family was there, along with several other people James didn't recognize. What's going on? James asked, confused. I have a surprise for you, David said. When you told me you'd been trying to find me for 40 years, I realized I wasn't the only one who should hear your story. So I tracked down some people I thought you'd want to meet. One of the strangers stepped forward. He was a man in his 60s with military bearing despite his civilian clothes. Mr. Mitchell, my name is Thomas Chen. I was one of the interpreters during the evacuation in 1975. I'm the one who wrote down David's information and gave it to you before the helicopter took off. James felt his breath catch. I remember you. You were so young. We all were, Thomas said with a sad smile. I've spent the past 40 years helping Vietnamese refugees find their families and rebuild their lives. When Dr. Nguyen contacted me and told me he'd found you, I knew I had to come and say thank you. You saved David that day, but you also saved me. Knowing that at least one of the children we evacuated survived and thrived, it's helped me cope with all the ones we couldn't save. Another person stepped forward, a woman in her 50s. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Sarah Thompson. I work for the Vietnam War Legacy Foundation. I'm the one you contacted when you started searching for David. I wanted to meet you in person and tell you that your story has inspired us to intensify our efforts to reconnect veterans with the people they knew during the war. Because of you, we've already found 3 other connections. James looked around the room at all these people, all these lives that had been touched by that one moment 40 years ago. He felt overwhelmed by the realization that his impact had rippled far beyond what he had ever imagined. There's one more person who wants to meet you, David said, and a very elderly woman was wheeled into the room in a wheelchair. She was tiny and frail, but her eyes were sharp and clear. David knelt beside her wheelchair. James, this is my Aunt Mai. She's the woman who raised me after I came to America. She's the one who kept your memory alive for me all these years. Aunt Mai looked at James with tears streaming down her wrinkled face. She spoke in Vietnamese, and David translated. She says she has prayed for you every day since 1975. She has prayed that you would know your act of courage saved not just one life but generations. She says she has wanted to thank you for 40 years, and now Buddha has granted her wish. James reached out and took the old woman's hand. He didn't need translation to understand the gratitude and love in her eyes. Tell her I'm honored to meet her, James said to David. Tell her she raised an extraordinary man who has made the world better. Tell her I'm grateful she kept my memory alive for David. David translated, and Aunt Mai squeezed James's hand with surprising strength. She spoke again, and David's voice was thick with emotion as he translated. She says you are a good man who did a good thing. She says that in her country they believe that saving a life creates a bond that transcends death. You and David are connected forever, in this life and the next. She says she will see you again when her time comes, and she will introduce you to David's parents, so they can thank you themselves. James felt tears streaming down his face. The room was full of love and gratitude, and he realized this was what he had been searching for all along. Not just to know if David had survived, but to know that his life had mattered, that his one act of courage had created ripples that spread far beyond what he could see. Over the next few days, James's condition deteriorated rapidly. He slipped in and out of consciousness, and during his lucid moments the Nguyen family was always there. David sat by his bedside holding his hand, telling him stories about the patients he had saved, the lives he had changed. Jennifer read to him from books of poetry and told him about her dreams of becoming a pediatrician like her father. Michael played guitar quietly in the corner, filling the room with gentle music. Lisa brought cool cloths for his fevered forehead and made sure he was never in pain. One evening, as the sun was setting and golden light filled the room, James woke to find David alone with him. David, James whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm here, David said, leaning closer. I need to tell you something, James said, each word requiring tremendous effort. That day in Vietnam, when I carried you out of that fire, I was terrified. I thought we were both going to die, but you held on to me so tight, with such trust, and I knew I couldn't let you down. You gave me courage, David. You saved me as much as I saved you. James, David said, tears streaming down his face. You gave me everything. A life, a family, a purpose. I owe you everything. You owe me nothing, James said firmly. Using the last of his strength, you took the chance I gave you and built something beautiful. You honored the sacrifice your parents made. You became the man they would have been proud of. That's all I ever wanted. Is there anything else you need? David asked. Anything I can do for you? James thought for a moment then smiled. Tell me about the patients you operated on this week, before you took time off. Tell me about the lives you saved. David's face broke into a watery smile. He understood what James was asking for. He wanted to hear proof one more time that saving him had mattered. There was a little girl, David began. 8 years old, born with a congenital heart defect. Her parents had brought her to 5 different hospitals, and every surgeon said the operation was too risky. But I looked at her, and I saw you, James. I saw a child who deserved a chance to live. So I did the surgery and it was successful. She's going to go home next week. What's her name? James asked. Emma, David said. Her name is Emma. Emma, James repeated, tasting the name. Tell her parents that she's lucky to have you as her surgeon. Tell them that they should never take a single day with her for granted. I will, David promised. There was also a teenage boy, 15 years old. Car accident. Massive internal injuries. Everyone thought he was going to die, but we worked on him for 8 hours straight, and we saved him. His mother held my hands afterward and called me a miracle worker. But I thought of you. I thought about how you gave me the chance to become someone who could save her son. James closed his eyes, feeling peace settle over him like a warm blanket. That's good, he whispered. That's very good. The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of monitors, and James's labored breathing. David held his hand, not letting go, not moving, just being present for the man who had been present for him 40 years ago. David, James said suddenly, opening his eyes one more time. Yes, I'm not afraid anymore. I know where I'm going matters less than what I'm leaving behind. And I'm leaving behind you. That's enough. It's more than enough, David said, his voice breaking. You're leaving behind a legacy of courage and compassion. You're leaving behind a family that will never forget you. You're leaving behind proof that one person, one decision, one act of bravery can change the entire world. James smiled, and it was the peaceful smile of someone who had finally found what they were looking for. Thank you, he whispered, for finding me, for letting me know it mattered. Thank you, David replied, for saving me, for giving me this beautiful life. As the sun set completely and the room filled with gentle darkness, James Mitchell took his last breath. He died surrounded by love, knowing that his one good act in a terrible war had created ripples of goodness that would continue long after he was gone. David sat with him for a long time after he passed, still holding his hand, still connected across the decades and the divides of culture and language and war. Finally, Lisa came in and gently touched her husband's shoulder. He's at peace now, she said softly. I know, David replied, and so am I. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, with full military honors. The small crowd included David and his family, Aunt Mai in her wheelchair, Thomas Chen and several other interpreters from the evacuation, members of James's old military unit who were still alive, and a surprising number of people who had heard the story and wanted to pay their respects to a man who had lived his entire life carrying the weight of others. During the service, David spoke about James with a steady voice, despite the tears streaming down his face. James Mitchell was a soldier who fought in a controversial war, David said. But his legacy isn't about politics or policies. His legacy is about the choice he made in one terrible moment to run into fire instead of away from it, to save one life when he couldn't save them all, to carry a frightened child to safety when he himself was terrified. David paused and looked around at the gathered mourners. James spent 40 years wondering if that choice mattered. He died knowing it did. He died knowing that the 5-year-old boy he pulled from a burning building grew up to become a surgeon who has saved over 1,000 lives. He died knowing that his courage created a family, a legacy, a future that wouldn't have existed without him. But more than that, James died knowing he was loved. After decades of loneliness and survivor's guilt, he spent his final weeks surrounded by the family he had saved. He died knowing that his one good act had created ripples of goodness that spread far beyond what he could see. He died at peace. David's voice broke, and he took a moment to compose himself before continuing. James once told me that he wasn't a hero, just a soldier who did one good thing in the middle of a terrible war. But I believe that heroism isn't about being perfect or fearless. It's about choosing compassion in moments of chaos. It's about saving one life when you can't save them all. It's about carrying the weight of your choices for 40 years until you finally find the peace you were searching for. James Mitchell was my hero. He was my savior. He was family. And I will spend the rest of my life honoring his memory by continuing to save lives, by teaching my children about courage and sacrifice, by making sure his story lives on. As they lowered James's casket into the ground with military precision, a bugler played taps. The mournful notes carried across the cemetery, a farewell to a soldier who had finally completed his last mission. After the service, as people were leaving, Jennifer approached her father. "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What is it, sweetheart?" David asked. "That little girl you saved last week, Emma. Her surgery was successful, but she's going to need follow-up care for years, and her family doesn't have great insurance. I was thinking maybe we could help them. Maybe we could start a foundation in James's name to help families who can't afford medical care for their children." David looked at his daughter with pride and love. "That's a beautiful idea. James would have loved that. We could call it the Mitchell Foundation for Children," Jennifer continued. "It could help kids like Emma, kids like you were when you were 5 years old, kids who need someone to fight for them when they can't fight for themselves." "Yes," David said, pulling his daughter into a hug. "Yes, that's exactly what we should do." Over the following months, the Nguyen family established the Mitchell Foundation for Children. David used his connections in the medical community to rally support. Lisa used her background in nonprofit management to handle the administrative work. Jennifer, still in medical school, became the foundation's youngest board member. Michael used his engineering skills to build a website and manage the foundation's social media presence. Even Aunt Mai, despite her advanced age, contributed by reaching out to the Vietnamese American community and raising funds. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful: to provide medical care and support for children whose families couldn't afford it, with a special focus on refugee and immigrant families. Every child helped by the foundation would be told about James Mitchell, the soldier who had saved a 5-year-old boy from a burning building, and set in motion a legacy of compassion that continued decades after his death. On the first anniversary of James's death, David visited Arlington National Cemetery alone. He sat on the grass beside the headstone which read, "James Mitchell, veteran, hero, friend. He saved one life and changed the world." David placed a photograph against the headstone. It showed James in his final days surrounded by the Nguyen family, smiling despite his illness. Next to it, David placed a copy of the photograph James had carried for 40 years, the image of a young soldier holding a frightened child. "I wanted to give you an update, James," David said quietly. "The foundation has helped 32 children so far. 32 kids who might not have gotten the medical care they needed. We're naming the new pediatric wing at Walter Reed after you, the James Mitchell Wing for Children's Cardiac Care. It opens next month." Jennifer graduated top of her class from medical school. She's starting her residency in pediatrics, just like she always wanted. Michael got a job with a company that designs medical devices. He's working on a new heart monitor that could save thousands of lives. And me, I'm still operating. I'm training the next generation of cardiac surgeons, teaching them that medicine isn't just about skill and knowledge. It's about compassion. It's about seeing each patient as someone worth saving, worth fighting for. David pulled out a letter from his pocket. "I also wanted to share this with you. It's from Emma's mother, the little girl I operated on just before you died. She wrote to thank me for saving her daughter's life, but I told her she should be thanking you, because you saved me so I could save Emma." David read from the letter. "Dear Dr. Nguyen, I don't know how to express what you've done for our family. Emma is healthy and happy, running around like a normal 9-year-old, and every day I thank God and you for giving her back to us. When you told me about James Mitchell and how he saved your life in Vietnam, I understood something important. Goodness doesn't die. It ripples forward through time, touching lives and changing futures. Mr. Mitchell saved you, you saved my daughter, and someday maybe Emma will save someone else. That's how we honor the people who save us. We pass it forward." David carefully folded the letter and placed it beside the photographs. "She's right, you know. Goodness doesn't die. It ripples forward. You rippled forward through me and now through my children, and through every patient I save and through every child the foundation helps. Your legacy grows bigger every day. He stood up slowly, his knees aching in a way that reminded him he wasn't as young as he used to be. I'll be back next year, James. I'll keep coming back every year for the rest of my life, and when I'm gone my children will come, and their children after them. You saved one life 40 years ago and that choice will echo through generations. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for running into the fire. Thank you for carrying me to safety. Thank you for finding me before you died. Thank you for letting me give you peace. As David walked away from the grave, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer sun. He felt connected to James across time and death, bound together by fire and courage and love. The veteran's last mission had been to find the child he saved and make sure the rescue had mattered. But in completing that mission, James had discovered something even more important. He had found a family. He had found purpose. He had found peace. And most importantly, he had found proof that one person's courage, one moment of compassion in the middle of chaos, could change everything. Sometimes we spend our whole lives wondering if we made a difference, if our choices mattered, if we left the world better than we found it. James Mitchell spent 40 years carrying that question, and in his final weeks he finally got his answer. Yes, it mattered. It all mattered. Because the 5-year-old boy he pulled from a burning building in Vietnam grew up to become a surgeon who saved 1,000 lives. Because that surgeon's daughter would save thousands more. Because their foundation would help countless children receive the medical care they needed. Because goodness, real goodness, doesn't die. It ripples forward through time, touching lives and changing futures in ways we can't predict or measure. James Mitchell wasn't a perfect man. He struggled with guilt and trauma, with loneliness and pain. But in one terrible moment he made a choice to run into fire instead of away from it. And that choice created a legacy that will live on long after everyone who knew him personally has died. That's the power of one good act. That's the miracle of one person choosing compassion in a moment of chaos. That's the proof that we all have the power to change the world, one life at a time. James Mitchell completed his last mission. He found the boy he saved. He discovered his rescue had mattered beyond his wildest dreams. And he died surrounded by love, knowing that his one good deed in a terrible war had created ripples of goodness that would continue forever. What will your legacy be? What ripples will you create? What life will you save, knowing that saving one can change everything? Think about it. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power we all have to make a difference, please share it. Let James Mitchell's story ripple forward one more time. Let it inspire someone else to run into the fire, to save one life, to choose compassion over fear, because that's how goodness survives. That's how legacies are built, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage that ripples forward through time. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you have the power to change someone's world today. Use it.